Welcome back to Navigating Complexity. In this episode, we're joined by Rick Archer, founder of Overland Partners. This interview delves into the realm of public infrastructure and his company's remarkable growth as a global architecture firm. Rick's ethos centers around a profound love for learning, describing his ideal client as someone who broadens his worldview during a project. As an architect, he believes in engaging deeply with the client's culture, place, and mission to authentically represent them. Drawing inspiration from literature, Rick makes parallels between John Steinbeck's storytelling and the essence of architecture, noting Steinbeck's ability to connect his narratives to history and the broader world. This method of storytelling informs Rick's design philosophy, reinterpreting rather than replicating for contemporary culture. He prioritizes creating good buildings over great ones, emphasizing their harmonious relationship with context and their support for the greater good.
Welcome to Navigating Complexity. What episode is this? 6?
6, yeah.
This has been fun, Matt.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
It's been fun.
Took y'all 6 episodes to get to me.
Yo,
Well, your
make
calendar,
sure
man.
you're bringing our A game.
Exactly.
All right.
So with us today, Rick Archer.
Thank
That's the introduction.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Rick.
I've had a little discussion with you, but Matt and I have talked about all the things that he's learned and enjoyed in working with you and just how long you guys have done things. And so I'm really excited to get into the episode and talk more about your life and what kind of makes this tick and what are some of the navigating of complexity that you've done through your life and how you've overcome certain things.
Well, it's very mutual. I think I've absolutely learned as much from Matt, maybe more than he has from me. I mean,
You know that's not true.
well, I don't know if y'all are familiar with Clifton Strength Finders, but
Yes.
my number one strength is learning.
Yeah.
And what I realize in life is that is what I gravitate to.
Yeah.
I gravitate to situations and people and environments where I can be learning. Because if I'm not, I get bored and then I just check out.
Yeah.
And I think Matt has that same kind of curiosity, and
Yeah.
we've gotten to learn a lot together.
It's wonderful to do that. Well, let's jump in to talk a little bit just so the audience gets to know more and I get to know more about your history and kind of, how you got started in the things that you're doing now, design, the architecture, or at least walk us through that.
Yeah, great. Well, like many architects, I decided at the ripe old age of 12 that that's what I should do.
Okay.
I think largely because I wanted to be an artist, and that didn't go well in my family. When you're saying, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I'd say, well, I'm going to be a painter. And they were like, well, he hasn't figured out what he's going to do yet.
Yeah.
And so at 12, I decided, well, maybe architecture would be an acceptable career that would be creative. And
Why architecture at that point? I'm curious.
I love to make things. I was a math whiz, and there was always this thinking around art and math become architect, and
That's interesting.
I sort of bought into that narrative even at a young age. And it's amazing to me how many architects I know who decided at about somewhere between 11 and 13 that's what they were going to do with their life.
That's really cool.
And
That's really funny because it's so different from being a real estate developer because it's the same formula. It's art plus math equals build a building.
Yep.
But I don't know any real estate developers that grew up knowing they wanted to be that.
dreaming of
Yeah, they kind of stumbled into it right through a different, but related career path. It's really interesting.
Interesting is I had a bug to be an architect, but it wasn't until like 22. It wasn't early.
Yeah.
And at that point, and we'll get back to your story. I just kind of reminded me of this. At that point, it was, I went and looked at the schools and really loved the art and just attracted to that. Also really good at science and math. But it was just I'm also left-handed, the creative piece of me that was just like, yeah. And so I ended up in finance, which is also creative in math. But what kind of made that decision for me was I went and interviewed some architects at the city I was in Midland. And they were just they were like, no, so many kids are coming in with this CAD stuff. And so it's taking all the jobs. And like, I don't want to go spend all this money to do that. That was the deciding factor. So it's just interesting how and that's why I was curious about you at 12. Like,
Well, I think there was another piece of it too. My dad was in politics. He was a congressman, and I saw, the toll that took on our family, the constantly running for election, and the challenges about being very, very public. And I think there was a part of me that was sort of running away from that.
yeah.
And that architecture and the arts felt like a safe haven.
Okay.
I was woefully wrong. I mean, as I got into architecture, I realized absolutely how political it is.
Right.
And so many of the things that I learned from my father and my mother through that environment of being in politics have been incredibly valuable to me. But I didn't get into it. It was kind of a running away.
Right.
But it found me.
That's so interesting. It's like I'm running away from the complexity of that into this other thing. And
I thought it would be simpler, but it actually wasn't, right? Now I find myself fully in the middle of politics on so many of the things that I work on. And those are the kinds of projects I gravitate to. I end up working on really complex, gnarly problems with very multi-headed stakeholders who often aren't agreeing with each other. And that's where I do my best work.
nice.
And I'm really, really bad with just an individual, strong personality. Like I'm not a boxer. I would be much more jujitsu.
Okay.
Throw something at me and I'll use that force.
Right.
But if you're expecting me to just sort of punch you between the eyes,
It's not going to happen.
like, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. It's really cool. At what point? So 12, you decided and just go straight into college and just did that? Or how would that journey look like?
Yeah. At that point, I was like, okay, how quickly can I become an architect? Young man in a hurry.
As we all are.
Yeah. Graduated high school at the age of 17, entered college, went to the University of Oregon, which had what was then ranked the #1 architecture program in the country. Also a top 5 gymnastics team. I was a gymnast and I had aspirations to do both and to be an Olympian and all the things that come with being a gymnast.
Yeah.
And about a year into that, I realized, that's not going to happen.
So you were in a 2-track mindset as architect and Olympian?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to do both these things and had not yet been dissuaded that wasn't possible. I mean, I learned pretty quickly that all of the architecture studios were only offered when I was in the gym, and I was in the gym 42 hours a week. So
competing
it
interests.
just, at some point I realized I've got to choose between these, and wisely chose architecture over gymnastics. It's kind of a short life. Transferred to the University of Texas in Austin and got a 5-year degree, which was the quickest I could get, professional degree. Got out, moved to Washington, D.C., lived in Virginia, and realized that I could game the system in terms of licensure. D.C. required that you have, there were 2 parts of the exam there. D.C. required that you have 3 years of experience before you could take one part. Virginia required you have 3 years before you could take the other. And I took them in different places.
Nice.
Literally within less than a year of getting out of school. And at age 22, I was licensed as an architect.
Wow.
Which, the average age today is probably 30.
Yeah.
And so that put me on this fast track to success. But, it's interesting. I got into it and pretty quickly realized I had a lot of missing pieces. I was really privileged that I lived across the street in an apartment from the Librarian of Congress, who lived in a very large house in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., where I was working, and became friends with his family through his 4 kids who were brilliant: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Davidson. Obviously, Librarian of Congress, his wife, incredible people, brilliant people. And I started having dinner with them almost every Sunday evening. And I found that I didn't know what they were talking about. I mean, literally.
Right.
And I would write words on my hand and then go home and look them up in the dictionary. And finally, I came to their house one day and I said to Dr. Billington, I just feel so undereducated. I said, I'm really good architect, but I don't know anything else.
Right.
And I'll never forget, he put his arm around my shoulder, took me into his library, and he said, I'm going to curate your reading. And he pulled Shakespeare off the shelf and he said, read this, we'll talk about it next week. Dante, Cervantes, Neruda. I mean, And so he literally curated my reading through his library over the time that I lived in that apartment, and remained a very dear friend up until his death. But that developed a love for literature and a love for learning outside of the thing that I had focused on.
Right. Yeah.
As a kid, I thought I hated to read, and then I discovered I absolutely was passionate about it.
Yeah.
And
you just had to be helped or mentored into like where to start.
Yeah, I need to understand. I had a visual language, but I didn't have a verbal language that I really understood. And so I'd say to this day, my work is more influenced by literature that I read than it is by the visual arts, or certainly than other architecture. That would probably be the last thing that I would reference for what I'm doing. And so I constantly voracious reader, always looking for how the writer as an artist crafts words, puts them together, the structure, the syntax, the whole concept of creating with words is very, very similar to creating with bricks and stone and steel and concrete.
I'm curious, when you chose architecture, did you have a path as far as I want to, because there's obviously, or assumptively, many choices of what type of architecture to create.
Right.
Was there something there that says I want to, and what I want to specialize in this versus that, or is it just I want to be versatile?
I don't think as a young architect, I had a clue. I mean, in all honesty, what I wanted.
None of us do at 22.
Yeah. I wanted to be famous.
Okay.
I mean, if to be really frank about it.
Yeah.
And I realized pretty quickly that was the wrong thing to pursue.
Right.
And, Nietzsche said that architects are attracted to fame like moths to a flame. And I realized pretty soon into my career that I was getting burned.
Oh.
That I was really being singed by that pursuit. And it was taking a lot of the joy out of what I was doing. And I literally backed up. I took a year off from architecture, actually almost 2 years. I just said, I got to figure out who I am if I'm going to have anything to give in this profession. And so I went and took a year just to grow, to mature, to find out who I was, and then came back to architecture after taking that time off. During that time, met my wife, got married. I mean, so it was a really fruitful couple of years, but it was certainly not the normal trajectory.
Did you stay in DC for that period of reflection?
I did. And what ended up happening is that I was, the firm I was working for was hired to design this retreat for world leaders that was in Virginia. And it was a small project, renovation of a little carriage house. And it wasn't getting done. And so I saw it. I thought, that looks really interesting. Again, young man in a hurry. I went to my boss and I said, put me in charge of the project. And then he looked at me as like, 22-year-old kid with no experience. Why the heck would I do that?
Right.
And I said, because you don't have any other options. Like, everybody's busy. Nobody's working on it. I know the project's sitting there. Put me on it. And he said, okay, I'll do that, but you have to do it on your own hours. You can't do it during the office. And I said, okay, I'm willing to do that if at the end of the design, if it's approved, that it'll come into the office, that you'll give me a team, and that I will be in charge of that team in the office. And I mean, I think he was like,
whatever.
Who's this guy?
and he kind of looked at me and he goes, you're right. I don't have a better option. And so I began working for this retreat center. And when I decided to take the time off, I actually went and lived at that retreat center.
Okay.
And kind of the joke was that I was only there for the work among the people at this retreat center. And it took us 7 years to complete the project, at the end of which Carol and I and our family moved to Texas.
Oh, wow.
So everybody's like, yeah, we told you they were only here for the work, 7 years later. But it really did significantly influence my life and really changed the trajectory of how I thought about the world. And,
how so?
well, I would say the biggest thing was that met some people who I was honest with about myself for the first time ever. Growing
You were
up,
how old at this point?
22.
Okay.
I was 24 by the time.
Okay. Because that's
I
a
left.
lot of reflection for a 24-year-old.
I'd become really good at appearing to be a certain way.
Yeah.
And it led to a great deal of success. I was blessed with very good intellect, made straight A's all the way through school, all-American gymnast. I mean, I kind of had the world by the short hairs, was the outstanding student of the University of Texas, chosen as the number one student in the country for student leadership. And none of that satisfied.
Right.
I think that was a part of it, is there was just continued to be this deep longing going, none of this stuff that I'm pursuing is actually making me happy.
Right.
And so part of that was, in order to be success, I had to hide who I really was, or I felt like I had to. That was actually a false narrative,
Yeah.
but it was one I bought into. And, maybe not in a small part, because when you're a part of a political family, it all has to appear good,
Right.
even when it's not.
Yeah.
And, my parents ultimately divorced, and I'm sure that politics, played a part in that, because it's just hard. It's hard on family. It's hard on individuals. And we all learn to kind of put up, the
Facade.
the great facade.
Right.
And that was just incredibly liberating for me to go, gosh, I can actually be fully known and still be loved.
Yeah.
And then in that, there was this, enormous gift of saying, okay, I can actually go and just be myself.
So identity is a big part of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was clearly all about identity.
I feel like, I've certainly had a similar experience, right? I feel like that's the circumstances are different, right? But there's almost if you don't find the time or make the time maybe early in your adult life to go through that sort of experience, you run the risk of, not living in a way that, really does fulfill you. Right?
And it's going to catch up with you.
Yeah. You cannot outrun it.
No.
I thought that was the flame was sort of the right analogy, right? Like you're just going to keep running back into it until you resolve it.
And I think a key piece to that, I don't know about for you all, but for me, was finding mentors.
Yeah.
People who had walked the journey before I had, who said, okay, come here, whether it was, Dr. Billington or others, who, literally wrapped their arms around me and said, okay, I'll walk through this with you. We'll get you, safely to the other side.
I mean, I still feel like today, the single most useful thing I can do with my time, if I'm trying to figure out how to do something, is find somebody that's done that before, who I respect, and ask them. Right. And so it's, even whether it's an hour, right, or whether it's that pivotal point in your life where you need that sort of deeper mentor relationship, or I love the reading list piece too, right? Because I feel like I've benefited a couple of different times, from just certain books that people recommend, right? But like without those things, it's hard. When you were talking about being an architect, the thing I kept thinking about was that I often wonder how much, when children decide what they want to be when they grow up, when they're really young,
Right.
that it's constrained by the choices that they have available to them, right, in their decision set. And so there's some professions, right, like more kids, I think, decide they want to be doctors because they know about it, right, and they're familiar with it, than maybe they would if they knew every single profession, right.
100%.
I don't know. It's so fascinating, because everything that you say kind of rhymes with experiences that I've heard from others, even though the details are just totally different.
What's interesting, in my family, I didn't know an architect. And no one in my family was artistic that we knew of. Turns out my mom was incredibly artistic, but she'd buried it. And my siblings actually are very artistic, but it wasn't something that was really drawn out in our family. I had this gift for drawing and painting young, and my parents recognized that and got me into classes. But my dad, I realized there was real wisdom when I said to them I want to be an architect, despite the fact they didn't understand it, and the architects they knew were either or underemployed. Said, well, let me introduce you to an architect I know. And so I went to their office. It was Kendall Heaton in Houston, really fine firm, and saw what they were doing. I was like, yeah, this looks really interesting. And then at the age of 16, actually 15, I think I had my first internship in an architecture firm,
Well,
and got to really see what that
I
was
do think
like.
it's highly unusual for someone at 12 and to kind of figure this out. And because especially today, we work with a lot of Gen Z and a startup that I work on, and it's there's so much like not knowing what you want to do.
Well, and they're going to do a gazillion different things during their life.
Exactly.
Right?
So I think one thing that strikes me is completely different from your journey is like, I knew what I wanted. And you had the second thing that you wanted to do, but you still have that one already identified. And so that's really cool because you can put all your focus into that. Then later, and at an early age too, at 24, you start doing that self-reflection, which a lot of us, may do that in our mid 30s or 40s because it's like, it's not as quick as we haven't figured out that first piece. So I think that's pretty interesting.
But I do think there's sort of a hack for people who don't have that level of conviction, right? Because I didn't. But what you can do, right, is you can have a high level of conviction about something for a short period of time, right? So I did that with sailing. And the thing that matters is just that you do something and that you do it.
It's really true.
Feet both in, it doesn't really matter. So yeah, I think if just in terms of, because I hear that question a lot, right? Like, how did you know you wanted to be a real estate developer? I'm like, I didn't. Like, I was doing it before I knew I was doing it, and so I think that's a big part of it, right? It's like you don't actually have to know, but what you do have to do is jump in with a ton of conviction into something, and maybe you're wrong, but you'll do something else later.
I always think about one of my mentors used to say, to the ship that charts no course, no wind is favorable.
Yeah.
He said, just figure out where you're going. And then I would add it into that, lean into the wind, right? Because it's going to take you places you don't expect to go. It's not like you chart the course and I've got to get there.
Right.
But one of the things I've discovered about myself over time is I'm very much of a journey person.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not a destination person. I don't go, I'm going there and I'm going to get there. Although I knew I wanted to be an architect, I really was very open to what that journey ultimately would take me on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there have been so many shifts in different directions along the way as the world has come to me.
Right.
And learning to live in harmony with the world around you rather than always going against it was important for me. I know there are people whose success is made by going against the world.
Right.
But for me, it's definitely been about, well, where's the force and how do I go with it? Again, the jujitsu rather than boxing.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel a similar path. And you have a lot of motivational speakers out there that are get up at 5 a.m. and hustle. And then there's other successful individuals that do the flow. And it's more like flow with, be like water flow instead of doing the fight. So I really appreciate that comment. But yeah, I'm glad that you brought that out because it's not as simple as I decided to be an architect and that's what I am today. It's like even within that same field, there's all these choices that you've got to flow through and various parts of identity that come out through that same field, which is not as simple as, a lot of times we associate our career with our identity is a large part of that, but there's so much more to how complex we are as individuals, bringing that navigating complexity back into the mix. So going back to your story, you moved to Texas.
Moved to Texas for school, then moved back to Washington, D.C., worked, and then decided to start Overland with my three best friends from college. So we decided on San Antonio. At the time, Austin was a nothing city. Sorry, Austin, but I mean, it's amazing what Austin
It's still smaller than San Antonio.
I know, but there was nothing going on here, right? Had grown up in Houston, partner from Midland, partner from Amarillo. None of those places appealed to us, and a partner from San Antonio.
You don't think Amarillo's attractive? I've lived in both of those.
And we've done work in both those places, and I've grown to really love the people.
People are great, but it's just flat.
It is very flat. But we decided on San Antonio, rich architectural heritage, and we started Overland in the midst of the recession in 1987. I mean, it was the deepest recession Texas has been in certainly in any of our lifetimes. And it was actually a great time to start a practice because there was nothing to do. And we could only go up.
Okay.
And-
That's a great way to look at it.
Plenty of time to build systems.
Well, and you've got to really be an optimist to be an architect.
Yeah.
I mean, because you are constantly working against odds to realize something. It's probably true in any business, quite honestly. Optimism and grit are keys to success. But I remember we were interviewed by the San Antonio Business Journal the year that we opened, because I think we were the only new business in San Antonio that year. Literally, we were front page. And they asked us, the reporter asked us what style of architecture we did. And one of my partners, without missing a beat, just said, survivalist.
That's so good.
And that really was what we did. None of us was independently wealthy. We really wanted just to be together. We wanted to use the business as a way to cultivate the friendship. And we hoped to do great work doing that. But I don't think that we ever dreamed or aspired to actually even where we are today. The thing in a lot of ways that changed all that was another person who mentored me and us, which was Lady Bird Johnson.
Oh, wow.
And and to this day, I have no idea how we even got on their list, but apparently they had a list of about 75 architects across the nation that they were interviewing to design the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. We got on the list, and I remember getting a call from Dee Dee Rose, who is in Dallas, and an incredible human being, dear friend, patron of the arts and architecture, worked with all the greatest architects in the world. She was chairing the architect selection committee, and she called and said, well, you've made the short list. We're down from 75 to I think 11 or something. And we're going to go and visit one of your projects, and then we'll cut down the list from there and we'll interview. And I remember getting off the phone with her, and I said to my partners, well, I've got some good news and some bad news and some good news. And I said, the good news is we made the first cut. The bad news is they want to visit one of our projects.
Oh.
The good news is we've only done one, so we don't have to argue about which one. And so we literally took Lady Bird, I think Helen Hayes, the Academy Award-winning actress, the mayor of Austin, the former chief of staff, the White House, the Secret Service, out to this $32 a square foot apartment complex in the Texas Hill Country. And
how old are you at this time?
I was 35. Yeah. I think
So you just got the firm going.
Just got
all
the
of a
firm
sudden
going.
it's the bright lights.
And we were just like, this is fun. We're just going to have fun.
Right.
Because they're not going to select us.
Right.
So we're going to get to kind of live the dream. So we toured them around, and what we didn't know was that Lady Bird was legally blind. So she actually couldn't see the project, which was probably a good thing. She was incredibly frugal.
Yeah.
Germanic roots, and $32 a square foot sounded great to her.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And then the last thing was that in the middle of this complex was a great oak tree that we had built the buildings around. And she walked up to the tree and she said, "You saved the tree." We're like, "Yeah." And then she listened and she heard bees. And she said, "And you saved the bees." And we were like, yeah, the bees. Like, we had no idea.
Just agree.
And I think the combination of those three things got us to the interview.
Wow.
And so now we're interviewing against all these people we literally read about in our textbooks.
They're like your heroes.
Oh, yeah. And we're like, what? This is ridiculous. And the real dilemma that we had is when you go to an interview, typically you talk about who you are, what you've done, and how you'll approach the project. They already knew who we were. It was a very short story. They'd seen the only project we'd ever done. So they really only left us one thing to talk about, which is how we would approach their project. And we knew that all the other architects were going to come in with slideshows of just amazing images of their work.
Yeah.
So we decided to show them images of indigenous Texas buildings in hill country settings with wildflowers. And say, this is what would inspire the work we do. The only problem is pre-internet, where do you find those?
Right.
And we went to every library, university library, county library. And
all four of you. You're just like scouring
that's
Central
all. I mean,
Texas.
literally looking for anything we could find. And one day we were out at the Wildflower Center in their old site, which was in East Austin. They were in a double wide trailer and they had a quote library. And the library had this giant file of slides. We started going through it and there were just the most amazing photographs of exactly what we were looking for. So turned to the librarian and said, "Hey, can we borrow these slides?" And she's like, "Yeah, take all of them. No one's ever looked at them nor asked about them."
Wow.
And so we did our entire presentation from images from the Wildflower Center. Wow. And when we were in the interview, somebody said, "Those are the most beautiful images we've ever seen. Where the heck did you find them?" And I remember I turned beet red and I just said, "From your library." And at that point, Lady Bird leaned over to, I think, Lowell Leberman, who was the mayor, former mayor of Austin. And she said, "They're very resourceful." and so, when I got a call later on from Dee Dee, and she said, "I was calling to let you know that we've selected you."
Wow. Were you floored?
Oh, I just started laughing. I was like, "You're kidding." And she goes, "No, I'm serious." I said, "Why the heck did you select us? I would have never selected us."
Right.
And she said, "We just thought you'd be fun to work with."
You never know.
Ultimately, that really is the thing that does it, is do
Yeah.
you think this is going to be an enjoyable journey?
Yeah.
You have to meet some basic level of competency,
Right.
but is this going to be fun? And that project changed our life. Lady Bird changed our life.
Right.
I mean, I was not a sustainability architect.
Right.
I'd never really, quite honestly, thought about how to build in a rural environment. I'd always built in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And she taught us how to look at the world. And through that, our entire practice got shaped. And when that project opened, it was covered in the New York Times, said that it showed how to solve some of the world's greatest problems. World Book Encyclopedia said it was the most provocative project in the world. This little baby project,
Yeah.
just took the world by storm, and it changed the way people began to think about how we built.
That is so cool.
And to this day, continues to have this profound influence. I mean, if
It
you
still
think
feels
about,
that way too when you go there.
if you wouldn't think about not thinking about sustainability, but it was the first publicly accessible, quote, sustainable building built in the United States.
No.
And that really set our whole trajectory where we became really interested in building performance, not just from an environmental and energy point of view, but from a human perspective. How do buildings really shape people's lives?
So I'm sure, one, wow, it's just a great story. I love that story. And now I'm going to be facetious. I'm sure that came with no challenges. Can we talk about some of those that you?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was actually great. Lady Bird, one of the kindest, most visionary people I've ever had the privilege of working with, and I say that knowing that as an architect, you work for people who are successful.
Yeah.
Right. You are building. People don't build buildings unless they, particularly bespoke buildings, that are to help accomplish a mission, unless they've been successful. Obviously, at the time, she was considered the most respected woman in America, and for good reason.
Right.
But they also had to raise money.
Yeah.
And we had a budget of $7.2 million and not a penny over. And even then, that was a modest budget for what we created. And so budget was always a challenge. But probably the bigger challenge was the environmentalists, that we were building over the Edwards Aquifer, and we were under fire from all the environmental groups about why an environmental group would do that. And I remember the night that the board was facing that, we were with them talking about the design, and they had to decide whether or not to move forward under heavy fire. And Lady Bird said, "I can see the epitaph on my tombstone now. it'll read "Killed by Friendly Fire," because she was the mother of the environmental group.
Right.
Now, what ended up happening is once we proved you could build in an environmentally sensitive way that actually enhanced the land, at the time, North America's largest water harvesting system, the first, the prototype for LEED, which is leadership in energy and environmental design. All the environmental groups then wanted to host their meetings out there, and it became really the darling of the environmental groups. And I think more importantly, thousands of acres around it that had already been permitted for rooftops became a perpetual green space. And that would have never happened had they not planted themselves in that place and had the courage to do what was right. And we had to figure out how to design to that.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember sitting with her in the very first meeting and saying, we're here to serve you. This is your vision, your project. What do you want it to be? And she said, I just want it to look like God put it there.
Nice.
And we're like, man, we're in trouble.
Talking about low expectations there.
But I look back on that and realized that was so huge, because as a young architect with the bar set higher than you knew you could jump over, it just meant you jumped as high as you could.
Right.
And the project is far from perfect, but it certainly has had a profound impact on how we think about design and construction, even to this day.
What a wonderful story. I really, really enjoyed like all the experience and I can just imagine all the mentorship and just all the challenges that then it reminds me of just kind of refining through gold. You just have to go through that fire to get to the really nice.
Well, and Rick kind of hit on, I think what's the core of that developer, owner, and architect relationship, right? I remember one of the first times that we were in a meeting together, and I remember trying to explain a vision for Springdale Green for this very messy piece of property.
Is this where you guys first?
It was our first project together, and I remember saying it, and then Rick's drawing on a piece of paper, and the pictures coming together, and it's what I had in my head, but I don't have any of the skills, right, to translate it, and then it's also way better, right? It's like a second iteration on top of it. And so I think it's
like AI at first, right?
Like that. Yeah. But like that skill set, right, was probably there, or at least you cared to, lean into that as hard as you could on that first project, just like, when we met however many years later. And I don't know, I feel like that's kind of always been the secret sauce, right? And sort of the rarity when you take on those big projects, right? It's like there's, you have to sort of be able to do that and be able to have that judo, right, that you said, because it's, I don't know, any piece of art is like the materials plus the vision, right? And I think even just thinking about architecture and construction as art, right, is not something that you find all the time in our industry either.
I think really what we do as architects is we take something that exists first in the invisible world, and we make it visible.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so the unique ability of an architect is to be the translator.
Right.
So you already had the idea, right? It exists. Lady Bird had an idea. What we had to do is take that invisible thing and make it tangible. And I think that's always what creativity is doing, right? We have to make it useful and tangible in the world today. Useful is probably the wrong word, but of value.
Yeah.
When Lady Bird become much older, and we worked together for about 15 years, she had a stroke and she lost her voice. She's one of the most eloquent humans I'd ever been with, because she could speak in a language that everybody understood.
Yeah.
I mean, a king and a prince, a president, and the poorest person on the street. I mean, she just had a way. She came rolling across the grounds of the Wildflower Center. Her assistant, Shirley, who'd been with her forever, she was in her wheelchair, and she had this way of greeting me where when she'd see me, she'd put her hands together and she'd sort of bow, which is really humbling. But
it's just wonderful how people impact us through how they are.
Yeah. And then Shirley said to me, Lady Bird wants you to know that since she's lost her voice,
Mm-hmm.
the Wildflower Center that you created together has become her voice.
Oh, wow.
And so, one of the things I've begun to think about is that part of what we do as architects is we give voice to the voiceless.
Yeah.
That the buildings they're telling a story. They're telling a story about what we value most. And so if we do it well, people can actually read, like what you were talking about, can really understand, oh, this is what Matt's trying to accomplish here. And that's really our job. And then get out of the way. Let the buildings speak for themselves and do their job.
It's so incredible.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other things too that I think is so interesting is that, part of the reason that I got interested in real estate, right, is that 40% of the world's emissions come out of these buildings, right?
Yep.
And then Rick had been thinking about this problem for a long time. And what I've always been blown away with about design is that you read, and I see this a lot in my prop tech life now, where you go out and you see there's this new widget, right, to solve some environmental problem, but you can deal with half of it through good design, right? That costs the same amount of money as if you had bad design. And so I don't know, it's just always sort of struck me as like a place to spend a little bit of extra time if you care about that. And then also, humans spend 90% of their time in the built environment. And so like, when you think about just sort of the things that impact our day-to-day happiness and survival as a species or planet, right? There's not a lot that where I feel like you can solve a design problem and have a real impact on a lot of those things. And I think it's very frustrating as a developer to know that and like not have any solutions sometimes to, depending on the project or whatever, right? From the, either from the, architecture and engineering community, or just, it's practically not cost feasible, right? If it's a real solution, but design, you can always tackle those problems.
Well, and most of the things that we're actually designing, they haven't changed since the beginning of time. I mean, literally the most practical things that were going to make the biggest difference in terms of the energy performance or the quality of the environment haven't changed. Get the building oriented in the right direction, put shade on the south side, don't have a lot of windows on the west because it's hot. And I mean, they're pretty simple. And we spend a lot of time trying to fix those things through the widgets.
Yeah.
When actually, if we would just think very simply from the beginning, and that was one of the lessons from Lady Bird. Like, she lived in harmony with nature, and like God put it there. What kind of things he wouldn't do? The groundhogs live in a certain way because it works without them having to air condition their hole in the ground, right? I mean, so I think those are things. Yes, we are making advances. We've made incredible advances in lighting. And the energy it consumes in glass, and certainly in material science, we're able to do a much better job. But we got to start by just reducing the need, and quite honestly, we also need to be willing to change the way we live. Ultimately, which is the harder part.
What do you think are the big changes that are needed there, or that would move the needle?
Well, we've become so accustomed to being where we want to be when we want to be there,
Right.
whether that's virtually or physically. We've become accustomed to doing that independently without dependence on one another. And that drives so much of our consumption. And then we also build things oftentimes that are way beyond what's actually needed to solve the problem, whether it's the home we live in or the building, because we're trying to make some statement beyond what's actually needed.
Right.
And so some of the hubris that comes with just being human beings, it requires a level of humility. I have not yet seen somebody who has built more to prove a point, be happier than somebody who actually just built what they needed.
Right.
And but those are the kind of things that it's hard. You can't convince somebody to not do something.
That's
in fact,
a complex problem.
people want to be convinced to do more.
Yeah.
Like, they want me as their architect to convince them that they ought to have more.
Interesting.
And the harder discussions are, do you really need that? And they don't want to have that conversation necessarily. Now, we do a lot of work with the marginalized, and those are very different conversations. And quite honestly, I find them more rewarding and richer, and we're able to actually get into the real essence of what it means to be human, what we need to do in order to not just give dignity to, but celebrate their humanity, no matter, where they are in life. And I love those projects.
Yeah. But also, I don't know, they just, we've all been in those spaces where you're like, wow, there's not, you can feel the lack of respect, right, in the design for the experience of the human in this space.
Right.
And so often that gets pointed at that population, right?
Yeah. So we developed this whole concept, it's probably been 8 years ago. We realized that what we wanted to do as architects is we wanted to create physical transformations that led to human ones. That the building, it was never just a building. The building was never the end game. Like this building is useful and beautiful because it works for this studio, right? And if you just said, hey, we're going to just build a building, but that wouldn't work for you. Labor didn't just want a building. She wanted something that would further the mission of helping people understand the importance of native plants and the impact that they have on the planet. And so recognizing that, we started saying, well, how would we measure whether our buildings are actually leading to human transformation? And what we were told basically was you can measure energy performance and you can measure, indoor air quality, and you can measure these things, but you cannot measure human outcomes.
Right.
And I was like, I don't believe that. I think we have to. I think we have to really begin to understand what does this mean to society, and what would be a metric. And one of the great things is when you're dealing with people who live on the margins, like the unhoused, we could start saying, well, how do we do in terms of numbers of people on the street?
Yeah.
How are we doing in terms of these people being able to live independent lives once they've been through the program here? How are we doing in terms of their willingness to enter this place as a person who may be averse to going into a building? And those are all very measurable. And as we begin to set those out, we created a measuring system we call the human handprint. And the handprint is about saying, and some of it is about a reaction to what we see happening often in the world, which is humans and architects go in with what I'd call a big ass footprint. It's like, we're going to just tell you the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
But that's not what we should be doing as we care for one another, right? And the hand is a symbol of care. It's the way we greet one another. We embrace, we heal, we say goodbye, we high five when we've done something well. And so the handprint is built around 5 digits. The pointer is aspiration. Why are we doing this project? That's the very first thing that has to be understood. And it's amazing how rarely that question is actually asked.
Yeah.
We just start designing.
Right.
The middle finger is inspiration.
It's also a pointer.
Or provocation.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that one of the things we found that in our best work really provokes change. It provokes people to think differently. They often will go, wow, I wasn't expecting that, but it feels natural. It feels inevitable. But for example, when we were working with First Center for Abused Children, we wanted to provoke people to think differently about how we care for those kids. And they were kids that were having to be taken from the police station to the medical hospital to the foster care system. They were being shuttled all over the city. And it was a horrible experience for them. And yet that was just the way we did it. Instead, we created a center where the police and the perpetrators come in the back door, and the kids come in the front door. And we totally turned upside down the way people thought about how you care for kids who come out of abuse. So much so that Fast Company in 2020 said it was the most innovative healthcare project in the world. And we didn't do anything fancy. We connected them to nature. We treated them with dignity and love. We cared for them and their families. I mean, just the basic things of humanity. But we're not doing that well. So provocation, relationships is a ring finger. there are a lot of relationships that we have to manage, cultivate. So when we meet with a client, we want to understand what are critical relationships here, who are not just the clients, but who are the other stakeholders, what are their expectations, how do we help cultivate those relationships. Pinky is stewardship, and we say it's the pinky promise that we make to the earth and to one another to steward well, whether it's financial resources, the earth's resources, cultural resources, and then the thumb is well-being. Is this building leading to human flourishing? And then we establish key performance indicators on each one of those digits that are unique to that project. So at the end of the day, our clients can say, did we actually accomplish what we set out to do? And we're held accountable to that as well.
I love that. I have learned so much today. I'd like to get you back to another episode. Don't you think?
Yeah,
that'd be fun. I'd enjoy that. I feel like we just scratched the surface.
That's how I feel. It's like we're out of time. But this has been such a.
I have a bunch of questions.
Yeah, me too.
I'd be like, just shut up. You're not going to make this better. Just don't ask.
But no, I think this wraps us up today, and it's been a great learning experience, and I've really enjoyed.
Thanks, Dan.
Hearing
really enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot, Rick. Appreciate it.
Your life's journey has just been wonderfully amazing. As you were speaking and thinking about all the people I want to share this with, so did you know this? Did you know this? There's so much learning, but I have a ton of questions, and so I think we need to schedule another one.
I'd love that.
All right.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Rick Archer, for sharing your expertise and vision on this podcast. Follow Navigating Complexity to stay up to date and tune in to our upcoming episodes.